Welcome, it is Mitch. I am on YouTube. If you've been here before but haven't clicked the subscribe button, please do. Appreciate all the interactions, like, comment, whatever you want to do, however you want to slice up the pie. Appreciate the support as we try to build the channel up. Wanted to spend today's time on the video kind of grazing over the landscape of the NFC North and the division rivals around Green Bay. You know, if you go strictly by wins and losses, Week 1 couldn't have gone any worse for Green Bay. They lose in Brazil to Philadelphia. All other three teams in the NFC North, Lions, Vikings, Bears, all win. Obviously, the cherry on top that made it even worse for Green Bay was the MCL sprain suffered by quarterback Jordan Love. But kind of wanted to zoom things out, take a broader look at those three teams in the NFC North, how things look heading into Week 2 for all three of them, and then kind of stack it up with where Green Bay's at. Obviously, we talked about Green Bay in yesterday's video. If you want to check that out, kind of final thoughts on their Week 2 matchup against Indianapolis. I think it's a matchup where the Colts are going to stack the box if it's Malik Willis starting, force Green Bay's passing attack to beat them with QB2 in, instead of letting Josh Jacobs run wild all over the Colts defense, a la what Joe Mixon and Houston did Week 1. Houston had the most rushing yards of any team in Week 1 in the NFL, 213 as a team against Indianapolis. Mixon had 30 for $159, I think it was. So it's a fascinating matchup. It'll be a chess match in the home opener Sunday at Lambeau Field. As for the rest of the division, I'm trying to think of where we want to start. Let's start with the Bears. Let's start with Chicago. I watched that game start to finish. I watched all three games, Week 1 start to finish, Bears, Lions, Vikings. It helped that one of them was separated, the Lions getting a primetime showdown against the LA Rams in a standalone game. But let's start with the Chicago Bears, because if I'm a Packers fan, here's what worries me about that game last week and heading into Week 2 and moving forward throughout the season. Chicago trailed that game to Tennessee 17-0 in the second quarter last week. Bears teams of years past, I don't care if it's the Justin Fields era, the Mitchell Trubisky era, if you want to talk head coaching eras, Matt Nagy, Mark Trustman, whatever. They lose that game 10 times out of 10. Bears teams of years past in recent history, down 17-0 in the second quarter are not coming back and winning that game. And what worries me most, if I'm a Packers fan about it, is not only did the Bears come back and win, but it wasn't some sort of, offensive overtaking the game, some sort of offensive outburst where Caleb Williams and company just figured it out, flipped the switch, and lit up the world. It was a win that was led by defense, that was led by special teams. They had a punt block return for a touchdown. Former Packer Jonathan Owens, safety, returned it to the house. They had a pick six of Tennessee quarterback Will Levis on a bizarre play by Levis where, if you go back, if you haven't seen the pick six from Levis, it was a terrible decision and a gift wrap for Chicago's defense. But that's what worries me if I'm Green Bay. Down 17-0. Chicago came back and won in a game where recent years they lose that matchup 10 times out of 10, win falling behind the eight ball that badly. And what worries me even more is that they did so in a comeback effort without the offense looking great at all. It had shades of a Lovie Smith era win. And I thought Lovie Smith in his tenure way back when as head coach of Chicago did a great job, was able to really milk out the most from some teams that, offensively certainly weren't stacked, but defensively had a lot going for them. And, of course, Lovie was a defensive-minded coach, and that Bears defense just buckled down. They won that game, 24-17, and it was 17-zip in the second quarter. The defense for Chicago figured it out, solved the riddle, and really, really hammered home on the Titans. Really the second half, but also halfway through the second quarter. So I would say 2.5 quarters, the Bears defense was just dominant against the Titans. They really just, they solved the Rubik's Cube early on after a hot start from the Titans. Mentioned the offense for Chicago. It was terrible, but they got the touchdowns via special teams, via defense to sort of jumpstart things. The Caleb Williams aspect of this will be fascinating to follow. Obviously, number 1 overall pick. Chicago thinks it has its future franchise at quarterback. This offense was built by general manager Ryan Poles, by the rest of that brain trust in Chicago. The offense was built for a rookie quarterback to come in and succeed right away. You want a rookie wide receiver to be your tag team partner for the long run? Rome Odunze, took him in the first round. You want a veteran receiver who's a great possession receiver, one of the best to do it in recent memory? Here's Keenan Allen. We trade a middle of the draft future pick to scoop up Keenan Allen. And then you want the star wide receiver that's in his prime right now? Here's DJ Moore. So weapons-wise, it's set in place. I think there's questions still with the offensive line in Chicago, but this is a situation where if you're going to start a rookie quarterback, it'd be hard-pressed to find a better situation for a rookie QB to step in and immediately be successful. That's what Caleb Williams has on the plate for him in Chicago, and it's something that you weren't able to say about Mitchell Trubisky, something you weren't able to say about Justin Fields. Bears front office, give them credit where it's due, hat tip. They've built this thing, solid defense, defensive-minded head coach, which we'll see how that plays out, and an offense littered with talent, littered with weapons of all different degrees. A rookie wide receiver who's supposed to be a stud, a veteran that you can always rely on, and a guy who's in his prime and already a star wide receiver. And so the Bears, if Caleb Williams turns out to be good, and if he is the real deal like Chicago thinks he will be, could be scary times. And I know some Packer fans might roll their eyes at that, and the Packers are set up in a great spot. Packers have a lot of players in their prime. Youngest roster in the NFL. Made it to the divisional round last year. Youngest roster again this year. Jordan Love, we think he is a superstar to be a budding superstar in this league. You saw him prove that in the second half of last season. But if Caleb Williams, that's the question, if Caleb Williams is the real deal, this Chicago roster is going to turn out to look really, really loaded. Now, it wasn't a good week one for the rookie. Caleb Williams, I love seeing some Bears fans on Twitter. They're like, oh, just look at the film. It wasn't as bad as you think. Just look at the film. It's like I watched the game. I did go back and watch just his throws. He sucked. He wasn't good. He felt the pressure. He got happy feet in the pocket. He tried running backwards on a couple of plays and got sacked. He missed Keenan Allen on a wide open little 8-yard out route. He missed a wheel route to, I think it was Allen again, down the far sideline in the first half on what would have been a big chunk play. Like, it's not even nitpicking. Like, Caleb Williams will be the first one to tell you he wasn't good. He expects better of himself. But Chicago still won. Again, that's the worrisome part if you're a Packers fan. Caleb Williams joined Desmond Ridder, by the way. Listen to this. Caleb Williams, Desmond Ridder. The only two quarterbacks in modern NFL history to throw 25-plus pass attempts and have less than 100 yards passing in a game. Williams also became the first rookie quarterback to do those two things, throw for less than 100 yards, but have 25 or more pass attempts and win their first NFL start. I think we'll really find out what Chicago is. It's a lenient schedule. You finish near the bottom of the barrel in the division last year. You're going to get that schedule for some of those opponents in the following season's campaign. But these next three are tough for Chicago. At Houston, primetime standalone game, Sunday Night Football. At Indianapolis, who I said in yesterday's video, I think if Indianapolis hits its ceiling, it's a playoff team. It's a team that can clinch a playoff berth. And then Chicago will host the LA Rams. So again, the next three, at Houston, at Indy, hosting Matt Stafford and the LA Rams. That's tough sledding for Chicago. You're going to find out a lot about the Bears in the next few weeks. I think one thing going for their rookie quarterback, no division games until week 11, which to me is an insane schedule layout. But before things really tighten up and you start playing some division rivals, Caleb Williams is going to have 10 games under his belt before he has to face the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions for 6 games on the back end. So I still think that's kind of a crazy schedule layout that benefits Chicago. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Click subscribe if you haven't already. Kind of looking over the landscape of the NFC North, the teams around Green Bay. Let's go to Detroit. It can keep it pretty simple with the Lions. To me, the Lions are, after watching that game Sunday night, and look, I know it went to overtime. I think the Rams are going to be a really good team if they can stay healthy. To me, the Lions are that level of good where heading into Sunday night, I was going to be surprised if they lost. Not shocked or stunned, because the Rams are a really good team. But Detroit opening up at home Sunday Night Football after the season they had a year ago, they just have so many pieces of the puzzle already in place, and that team is so bought in to Dan Campbell, it's unreal. Like, they buy his stock. That message from Dan Campbell does not go in one ear, out the other. And for some people, it can be over the top. It can be too much. It's rah, 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 rah. Detroit's bought in, and if that roster's bought in, that's all he needs, right? The coaching staff's bought in. The roster's bought in. And so it was a matchup where I was like, I'd be a little surprised if Detroit lost this game. And that's how good I think they are. It's not a knock on the Rams because I think the Rams are going to be a very solid team. But Detroit has, to me, they've really emerged as one of those teams that at home I would just more times than not, even against good teams, expect them to take care of business. And they backed that up in an overtime win against the Rams in Week 1. I do think one thing to circle here, offensive coordinator Ben Johnson got some head coaching more than whispers interviews last year and potentially could have landed the job, it sounded like, with the Commanders at one point in time. It sounded like it was his gig to turn down potentially. I think Ben Johnson sticking around to be the offensive coordinator with the Lions for another year helps things immensely. There's no turnover in that department. You have a team that's been so bad for so long, and then they burst onto the scene, and now they're really good, right? Detroit, and they win the NFC North last year. A lot of times you can see an OC leave. You can see a DC leave for a head coaching gig. I think them having that stability in the coaching staff helps out a lot, and Ben Johnson, obviously highly regarded as one of the best offensive minds in the game. So I think the familiarity of having him stay in place is so massive for this group moving forward ahead this year. And then obviously you'll see what happens with Ben Johnson next offseason, but that's a long ways away. Watching that game and watching last year too with Jared Goff, I know at the time, right now you probably feel like the Rams won that trade because Stafford for Goff's, Stafford won a Super Bowl with LA already a couple years ago over Cincinnati. Watching this team, though, operate in what's around Jared Goff on offense, I feel like he's the perfect fit at quarterback for how this team was built. I really do. It sounds so bizarre to say this. Detroit, to me, is built in a way where they don't need Superman at quarterback. Now, any team would sign up for it. If you told Detroit, hey, your quarterback could be the best in the league in a perennial MVP candidate year in and year out, they're going to take that. Jared Goff's very good, but he's not MVP type good. And that's not a slap to him. It's just the reality of the situation as a veteran quarterback who's been in the league for quite some time now. But he's been very successful. He helped lead the Rams to a Super Bowl appearance before he was traded to Detroit for Matt Stafford. And so it sounds weird, but I watch this team and I'm like, I don't think they need a savior at quarterback to win it all. I don't think they do. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's not like, when Nick Foles got hot as a backup quarterback for the Eagles and led them to a Super Bowl win over New England on that crazy playoff run they went on a few years ago. He's much closer to, being on a tier with Mahomes than he is Foles for that short little stretch he was on. But I don't think Detroit needs a Mahomes. Again, everyone would sign up for it. But this team's good enough, and they have the pieces around him to win it with Goff being who he is. I think he's a perfect fit for how this team was built. And one guy to keep tabs on, too, is Jameson Williams. He's one of those pieces around Jared Goff on offense. Former first-round pick out of Alabama, can beat you deep down the field, takes the lid off of defense. Led the team in targets against the Rams with 9, led the team in receptions with 5, had the only receiving touchdown for the Lions, and led the team in receiving yards with 121. If Jameson Williams emerges, I'm not saying as a superstar wide receiver, if he emerges as a week in, week out consistent wide receiver for Detroit, watch out. This offense might not have a ceiling. Because look around Detroit's offense for Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, and quarterback Jared Goff. Look at the pieces they have to work with. It's an incredible offensive line. It's a two-headed monster at running back. Sam Laporta is one of the best young tight ends in the league. And now you're telling us Amon-Ra St. Brown might have a legitimate running mate in Jameson Williams. If that happens and that comes to a reality for Detroit with Williams at wide receiver, Detroit's already for real. If Jameson Williams can be just consistent every week, and I'm not saying every week he's getting 121 yards and a receiving touchdown, if he can find that happy medium of 4 to 5 catches every week, 70 to 85 yards, hits a home run play every couple of games where he does have 120 yards and a touchdown, this Detroit offense is already good and already in place to be one of the better offenses in the NFC. If Jamison Williams can find consistency and stay healthy and stay on the field, watch out. So Detroit's scary. And then finally you have, again, it's Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate the support. The Minnesota Vikings. They went on the road. They demolished Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. The Giants are a mess. I watched that game start to finish too. I had the Bears on the TV and the Vikings game on the iPad, and I get the Giants taking Malik Neighbors, and I'm not going to make this into a Giants segment, but I get them taking Malik Neighbors as a superstar to be, hopefully for them at wide receiver. You need a quarterback. I mean, I know they forked over the money to Daniel Jones a couple years ago, but you can have as many great wide receivers as you want. You need a quarterback, and Daniel Jones just not cutting it. That was a tough watch. If you're a Giants fan, God bless you. Oh my goodness, that was a tough watch. I'm a neutral party there. Obviously, as a Packers supporter, you'd like to see the Vikings lose, right? But as a fairly neutral party watching that game, that was brutal. The Giants are not going to be good. Good thing for them, they might be so bad they might be in position to take whoever the top quarterback is coming out of college for next year. Whether that's Carson Beck from Georgia. A lot of people are high on Shedeur Sanders. We'll see, but that was tough. For the Vikings, from their perspective, I want to start with Sam Darnold. Super solid first start in Minnesota, or for Minnesota. Of course, the game was on the road. And Darnold started like 13 of 13. He was shredding that defense, and he was taking some shots down the field too. And they have the weapons to do that with Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson on the outside. I'm not going to rain on this parade for Darnold because it was against the Giants. I think that's cherry picking. I think that'd be the easy thing to do. It's not his fault the Giants popped up on the schedule and the Vikings demolished them. I'm going to rain on it a bit because I don't think in his 7th season in the NFL that Sam Darnold has all of a sudden found a pot of gold. I will throw in this caveat. This is by far his best landing spot as a starting quarterback, and I say as a starting quarterback. He was the backup in San Francisco last year, so if you want to count San Francisco as his best landing spot, it's kind of a cheap way out because he wasn't the starter. He started a game when San Francisco had things wrapped up, but Brock Purdy, of course, is the QB1 for the Niners. But you look at where he's been, too. Sam Darnold was drafted first round out of UFC, highly touted by the Jets, and the Jets have forever been a dumpster fire for quarterbacks to go to, and they hope they can get a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers to take them to the promised land, and we'll see how that turns out. But he was drafted into a bad situation with the Jets. It's like quarterback hell if you get drafted by the Jets. And then he ends up in Carolina, and we've seen how that's turned out recently for quarterbacks that go to Carolina. Bryce Young has looked disastrous, but what does he have to work around him? Carolina a couple years ago tried out the Baker Mayfield thing. Didn't work. He's now flourishing in Tampa Bay. Darnold was there for a cup of tea. Was horrible. It was horrible. Not Darnold was horrible. It was horrible. It didn't work out. That's the caveat I can throw in there in support of Darnold. He has his best landing spot, not by a little, by a country mile. This is Sam Darnold's best setup since he's been a starting quarterback at his previous pit stops and now in Minnesota since he's been in the NFL. So I get all that, and he has an array of weapons to distribute the ball to, especially when TJ Hawkinson returns. So I don't mean this disrespectfully, but nobody in the NFL is sitting around and thinking like, oh shit, the Vikings hit the jackpot with Sam Darnold. I think he can be a good quarterback for them, and a lot of that is the pieces around him. Aaron Jones at running back, and by the way, shatters my heart every time I see, I'm not going to do it, every time I see him doing the skull chant. I can't watch that too many more times. It makes me nauseous. But Aaron Jones at running back, Addison, Jefferson, to me, the best wide receiver in football, and then Hawkinson at tight end when he returns. It is a really, really good spot that any quarterback would likely want to step into. And so I think Darnold can be good. I don't know if I want to compare it to when Case Keenum took the Vikings on that magical run to the NFC Championship where they got stomped out by the aforementioned Nick Foles in Philadelphia, because I think Darnold can be more effective than Case Keenum was during that run. I just don't see that to anywhere close to being the ceiling for this team. making a run to an NFC title game. And maybe I'm wrong and I'll eat my words, but in entering his 7th season, I don't see this as like, oh, Sam Darnold finally figured it out. I think he's a decent quarterback. I think he can be a serviceable starter. I don't think he's going to take your team to the next level, even with top-tier talent around him on offense. We'll find out a lot this week because Darnold is facing San Francisco. And you can talk about the big injury on the offensive side with Christian McCaffrey and whether or not he's going to play. Flip it over to the other side. Darnold's going to have an opportunity to step up here and prove his worth against a really, really good 49ers defense and the team he was on last year as the backup quarterback. This just isn't a team to me that's going to contend for a Super Bowl. I think the max out for the Vikings, best case scenario, is somehow sneaking out a playoff spot. And I don't think I'm biased saying that. I'm most intrigued to see how this defense looks with another year of familiarity in Brian Flores' system. That's what I'm most intrigued to watch by because Brian Flores is, to me, a dang good coach. And obviously the quotes from Tua when Brian Flores was the head coach for Miami for a bit. Tua obviously not speaking glowingly about Flores recently, like a couple weeks ago. And, that was a few years ago. You would like to think Flores, has turned over a new leaf, or who knows how much of that needs to be taken with a grain of salt with the stuff Tua said, because I'm sure there's players that loved playing for Flores in Miami too. But he's a dang good coach. And I think he's a really, really, really good defensive coordinator as a head coach. Maybe it just doesn't work out. But he's a really, really good defensive coordinator who isn't afraid to really shake things up and throw so many different looks at an opposing quarterback. And so a second year now under his belt in Minnesota, I'm very curious to see how that defense grows and looks under Brian Flores. But yeah, a big test for them against San Francisco. Packers have the Colts, home opener. They're slight underdogs. Last video I said it was 3.5. I think it dropped to 2.5. So we'll see how things look for the Packers in the home opener against the Indianapolis Colts, but wanted to take a look around the rest of the NFC North. It is Mitch I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.